for the fall 2025 edition or series. For this series, starting today and continuing on through November the 20th, we decided to bring in the personalities of the Cow-Calf Corner, both newsletter and the SUNUP television program. So with that, our kickoff will come from the face and voice of Cow-Calf Corner on SUNUPTV with Mark Johnson, and he's going to team up with Dr. Parker Henley, talking to us about selecting and management of replacement heifers for long-term success. This is a topic that is extremely interesting in these times. So I'm Paul Beck. I'm an extension beef cattle nutrition specialist at Oklahoma State University. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves before we begin.
Dr. Lallman, you're muted. Sorry, it's been a long time since I got to say that. So
I'm famous for that and really good at being muted. David Lallman, extension beef cattle specialist here, Animal Food Sciences, Oklahoma State University. Let me just mention that this topic has been very popular on things we've produced here recently in social media. And so I just went and checked right quick, Dr. Beck, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Biggs, this week at OKC West, 516-pound steers brought 474, which is a total of $2,446 per head. And so you can understand why people are thinking about retaining replacement heifers so they can remain in the cow-calf business a bit longer.
definitely interesting numbers and interesting times. I certainly want to welcome everyone this afternoon. I'm Rosalind Biggs. I'm also a beef cattle extension specialist housed out of veterinary medicine. So with that, Dr. Beck, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, once again, thank you. We for sure could not, Dave and I would both agree, could not pull this off with the professionalism and quality that we do without Dr. Biggs' involvement. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Mark Johnson and let him talk to us about heifer selection.
Well, good to be here, Paul, and we appreciate all of you having Parker and I with you today. Our topic is selection and development of replacement heifers, particularly with an eye on the long-term productivity part. And Parker and I are going to tag team this, and he's going to address the selection part and some of the things we should be looking at in those heifers if we're weaning spring calves now and looking at, putting those in the production chain and developing, just thinking about the long-term aspect, the biological time lag of heifer development and all the things we should do along the way to keep in mind. We, as David mentioned, we're definitely at a robust time in the cattle market. We are seeing that by and large because of such a low national cow inventory. And I think a lot of us have tightened our belt and lived through some droughts here in the past 4 or 5 years. And it is a top of mind thing right now for all of us in the cow-calf sector of thinking about how many heifers and how to go about getting them in production. And even the debate, which we're not going to get into this too deep, would we be better off developing our own versus going out buying some bred heifers right now? But we know we're at a low. We know we need to bring some cattle back in production. And with prices and demand being what it is in the beef sector for our product, it's a good time to be thinking about capitalizing on things that we've got going on. I'm going to turn it back to Parker. He's going to get into the selection aspect of this, and then I'll finish it up talking more about development.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Really exciting to talk about this here today. And obviously, as we thought about it, we could talk about this for lots of time and go well over an hour. And so as Dr. Johnson alluded to the fact that, the big consideration, should you buy them or raise them yourself? I think we can all sit down with a calculator and look at some costs, different interest rates and things like that, and make decisions within our own operation. But we're going to address the situation or topic of keeping back heifers and how do we select those, how do we develop them for long-term success. And I believe a month ago when Paul came up with this idea, he made the comment that I hope maybe this round, as we expand our cow herd, maybe people just put a little bit of thought into the heifers that they select. And I thought that was interesting. And, I think the last time cow numbers were low and increased, it was just whichever heifer that was standing there, maybe breathing, that got bred was all that went into our selection criteria. And I think now input costs, everything are more and more. I think a few more things need to go into it. Like anything we do, I think you have to establish goals. And these are very, very generic here, but I think they're the really fundamental things behind developing and selecting heifers. We want them to reach puberty prior to breeding. We need them to conceive early in the first breeding season, calve unassisted, breed back after that first calf early in the second breeding season, have longevity, and ultimately we want to do that at low cost. And so that sounds really great. Like that's really easy. But what we're going to do is kind of break those down and talk about different steps along that path and how we can achieve those said goals going through that. So first things first, when you're selecting a female, we think these are big things to consider here. And I'm going to dive into over the next little bit here each one of these and probably talk about them just slightly, but and why they're important. Things like fertility, milking ability, disposition. We'll dive into a little bit of phenotype, as well as calving ease and growth rate there as well. So that's really what we're gonna dive into here. So with that, I think there are 4 big key timelines or time points, I should say, that selection, or maybe I should say culling, can occur. I think there's going to be data that you consider in that selection process that is taken at birth, weaning, at the yearling breeding time, and then also pregnancy check. And those are going to be some pretty big key time points. So for example, at birth, I wouldn't consider animals that are extremely heavy and might be an indicator of calving ease issues down the road. We're going to go to a point in a minute that talks about how, if you are planning on keeping heifers and implementing them into your herd in 2 years from the date they are born, those heifers that were born early in that calving season are going to have more age at the time when they're expected to be pubertal and breed. And they're likely, some data we have says that they will breed back faster. And so older heifers, we might also consider things like EPDs if they're available, or some of the genetic DNA testing available out there through the commercial market, and some of those scores. Additionally, we're going to look at weaning, just strict performance and growth. I would encourage you to weigh those cattle and look for cattle that have obviously performed, maybe not looking for the extremes on either end. And then one key point we'll have is at the breeding season. Obviously, we might wean some out there or cull some off if they don't achieve those growth parameters that we think are important. And then the last thing is we might all know that if an animal is open, they're a significant cost to our inputs, and pregnancy check is going to be one of those final things. So as we dive into that first thing that I talked about, fertility, it is a somewhat lowly heritable trait when we are breeding for cattle. And those lowly heritable traits, that's where heterosis or hybrid vigor sometimes has the biggest jump or gap. And so I've oftentimes heard that the black baldy female is obviously one that's considered very fertile and has a lot of longevity, which is obviously from the Hereford Angus cross there, and where we get that bump. And so if you're considering keeping back heifers, this needs to start early on in bull selection, if that's the case. Maybe identifying a complementary sire, both from a genetics, maybe even breed standpoint, that's going to see an improvement in fertility. I would encourage reproductive tract scoring early on, prior to the breeding season. And these are just some key goals that I would set in mind. You're obviously hoping that you can get 60 to 70% first service pregnancy rate, or 90 to 95% pregnancy rate for the season. And obviously having a strict culling process can eliminate some of those problem animals. Milking ability is another one. And, I think looking at the milky PD of the sire is very important. And we'll talk about some phenotypic things that we're going to look for in milk as well. But I always put this up here, and Dr. Lawman looks at this pretty intently, but I would consider that a milky PD that is somewhere in the middle. I would not chase extremes on this topic. Those extremely high milk sires or pedigrees that carry that. We can maybe associate that with some poor reproductive performance. And then obviously if we have too low, we might not see the calf performance that we're looking for. One thing that this overlaps, and Dr. Johnson and I were both fighting over who is going to talk about this relative to condition of our heifers. Yes, this is maybe a development topic, but it's also something that we're going to want to consider when selecting them. If we have heifers that are overly fat and have deposits of fat back in their mammary gland, that's going to cause problems with their milking potential as first calf heifers. And so I would encourage you to look at that, not only look for not having excess fat deposits, but you're going to look for even square teats. And I would consider the udder of the dam as well when you're doing that, and how she's kept udder quality over time. So pretty simple stuff there, but I think that's very important. I put this kind of a picture, obviously from a different country here, but we can all relate that the disposition of a cow herd can be extremely valuable if you're like somebody like my speaking partner here, Dr. Johnson, who always seems to have some injury while working cows. He can tell you too that you want to have a cow herd that is calm and gentle, because it is not easy. And this is moderately to highly heritable. And if you cull those crazy or wild cows, I think we can obviously have a safer environment. And I think there's a lot of things to that, and improvement in conception rates. I always get this. I'm the livestock judging coach, and everybody wants to know about the phenotype of the heifers that we select for. And I think we talk a lot about this with students, but the phenotype of a replacement heifer might very well depend on where you are at in the country. And I say that because we have a national audience. I see people on here from a lot of regions. And even if you're in Oklahoma, you can tell that our annual rainfall and forage availability type across the state could very much dictate a lot of selection criteria, and even the forage base, whether that's some fescue country over on the east side or more arid climate in the west. And so I'm pretty broad on this in terms of phenotype, but I do think there's some general considerations that we can put into mind. And so I put these very vastly different pictures up here, and by no means am I the end of this slide is going to throw shade at shorthorn marked cattle, but I think these are two pretty different looking phenotypes of replacement or bred heifers here. The black heifer on the right, clearly has a bolder, deeper, wider kind of skeletal build and rib type to her. She's clearly has maybe a little more flesh deposited to her versus the red and white heifer on the left. That's a bigger, longer, maybe narrower and shallower type of a body type. And so generally speaking, in areas where cattle have to graze pastures of some decent size, the phenotype of the black heifer with the yellow tags on the left is going to be more desirable. You know, I'm not talking about any big things relative to efficiency. What I'm saying is that we generally assume that cattle built like the one on the left are able to consume more forage, and they have better fleshing ability. And when we have a group of animals running together in a contemporary group, those animals that have the same, when we consider they all have the same access to feed, the ones that are easier fleshing, tend to be the ones that can certainly perform a little better. And so moderate cow sizes, not too large, not too small, with extra dimension. And again, when I say dimension and muscle type, I would not chase extremes in that category. I would be looking for cattle that are, that fit in this term of moderation for a lot of things. And I think that's very, very important. The other big thing outside of, body type, muscling, and things like that, you can't see in these two pictures specifically, but is their feet. And I think everywhere I've went and talked, people ask about feet, and it is a problem. And I would tell you that looking at their toes and the shape to their feet are very, very important. But I would encourage you to look at the dam and the sire's feet, probably is a bigger indicator. I think it's very challenging. If you're not a trained evaluator that has looked at a lot of feet and trying to look at a group of heifers in a dusty pen or whatever, and you don't do it very often, you can get tricked a little bit. And a lot of times what I've seen is if you have a nutritional insult, let's say you overfed the heifers for a period of time and they had rapid growth, you're not going to see the foot problems show up the next day. It might be 90 days, 120 days later when you really start to see the feet problems or when they go off of feed. And so if we're looking at kind of an ideal here, the fives on both of these two tables here would be what I would consider ideal. Toes that point straight forward, an angle to the hoof that is not like 9, but maybe not like 1 either, just kind of in the middle there with some slope and some soundness to them. I think those are very, very important things to look at. So overall in the phenotype, we want to consider eyes, udders, feet, body type, frame size, muscling, and then obviously fleshing ability as well. And so all that kind of really wraps up into a nice picture there. One of the last things I think that can be measured early on prior to breeding is the pelvic area measurement. And so this can be done by a veterinarian, but general rule of thumb is that if dividing the yearling pelvic area by 2.1 would indicate the size of the calf. And so if we've got extremely small pelvic area sizes, that might not be something that you want to dive into either there. And so those are some of those big considerations. Obviously, the one area that I left off was performance. And, I think obviously selecting cattle for performance is very important, but during the developmental phase as well, we're going to set some key parameters up that we want to develop those heifers. And so we thought this is one of those that really overlaps from selection to development. So it's a nice transition to Dr. Johnson as he kind of picks up from those weaned heifers and moving forward and developing them.
Yeah, and the slide we're talking about here, I think to put in perspective, if we go out and identify the heifers that we're going to hang on to and develop to bring into production as the next generation of cows. This I would consider one of the more important slides in our presentation, just relative to some rules of thumb, best management practices, and it's going to help us moving forward to have a plan as far as target weights. And it really begins if we are selecting a set of replacements out of our existing cow herd, we need a good handle on what the mature size of our existing cows are. The best way to do that, and it's not on the slide, is if you can capture weights of your 4 to 7 year old cows and just take that average, it gives you a pretty good feel for what the mature size is going to be of these replacement heifers that we're selecting right now. And from that mature size of our existing cow herd, let's say, for example, it's 1,400 pounds. Some fundamental rules of thumb is we would like to see heifers ready to breed by 14 to 15 months of age and at about 55 to 65% of that mature weight. And that helps us manage, and it helps us figure out some solutions in a year like this, where as we do this webinar today, we have got rain forecast for the next 3 days, but currently in the state of Oklahoma, our prospects for wheat pasture are modest at best because it's been a fairly dry fall since we put in that cool season seed. So whatever means we've got to take in order to get there, our target is that in order to keep those heifers calving by the age of 2 and have them at about 80% of their mature weight by the time they calve, whatever they're weighing now, those heifer calves that we select, we can take that relative to a mature cow weight. And if those heifers are out of 1,400 pound cows and we want them all locked in at about 65% or 2/3, our target is by next spring, whatever point we're going to turn out bulls or begin an AI season, is we'd like to have them at 910 pounds. Now, some people prefer to go the route that I'm going to develop them to about 55%. Sometimes that's intentional. Sometimes that's based on what we've got to graze. We're going to get into some numbers in a minute that tell us the percentages of heifers we'd expect to be pubertal, cycling, and having fertile heats relative to that 55 versus 65% number, but we'll save that until we get there. Generally, go ahead, Parker, next slide. Generally, and we talked about at the beginning of how good the cattle markets are right now, but we do want a forage budget. We want to think about how heavily we're going to be stocked. We want to start with the forage base and an anticipation of how much forage dry matter we're going to be able to make annually, and use that as a guide relative to how many heifers we want to bring back into production. That past research that I referred to a minute ago shows us that in 14 to 15 month old heifers, if they are at about 55% of their mature weight, we're going to see over half those heifers cycling and having fertile heats. But if we can get them to 65%, we should fully expect those heifers to be ready to breed. Over 90% of them should be ready to rock at that point by 14 to 15 months of age. Parker mentioned this one a minute ago. Often thought those cows that calve earlier, by the time we wean at a given point, are going to have the older and heavier heifer calves. Not a bad idea when we think about selection. But relative to these numbers and that second bullet point, if I decide I need 20 heifers to bring in production, and that's how many I want to be calving a couple years down the road, I'm probably going to exaggerate those numbers by 10 to 50%. I ought to be keeping back 22 to 30 heifers right now. And something that I always stress and I feel like is really important, especially in the markets that we're in right now, the most fertile time in a beef breeding female's life should be as that well-developed yearling heifer, 14 to 15 months of age, that we are exposing to a bull for the first time. There's really no excuse for her not to breed up early. So I suggest preg checking early after we've pulled bulls. There's different tools available to us, from blood cards to ultrasound, but preg checking early permits us to liquidate those open heifers as yearlings. They're going to be worth a premium value at that point, takes them off the feed bill, and long term, it's going to increase the fertility of a lowly heritable trait by eliminating those subfertile heifers of ever getting into production as cows. Said we touched upon this topic, but we're addressing this more from a standpoint that we're going to develop a set of replacement heifers that we're selecting right now. There is going to be cost involved. We've got feed and we've got time and we've got inputs. And so what we do, if we've selected a set of springborn heifers or even a set of yearlings right now, we're going to walk through that whole timeline, is we're setting them up to be productive cows until the age of 10, maybe even more. We're going to hope to avoid the biggest reproductive challenge in a beef breeding female's life, which is actually getting them bred for their second calf while they're raising that first calf. And this next slide shows some data collected over time that as we look at those 2-year-olds nursing their first calf, going through continuing to grow themselves, that we say is the biggest reproductive challenge that they're going to face. If we continue to develop them right, we see that as cows turn 3, 4, 5, 6, and really get into those prime ages of production is when we see the highest pregnancy rates of them as a cow. And typically, a lot of really well-managed commercial cow-calf operations are going to cull cows by the age of 10. This data would suggest why we tend to do that as a best management practice. Once they've turned 11 and 12, we're going to see some reproductive struggle in them as well. So how do we go about that as we get into this next slide? Typically in Oklahoma, if we've got wheat pasture, if we've selected heifers now at weaning, we're ready to turn them out on some kind of a cool season grass in the next month or 6 weeks, it's pretty easy to get those heifers to that target weight. And for example, if we were weaned off 500-pound heifers right now, that 910-pound figure that we looked at a couple slides back was our target. It was nice to always think of everything as being linear and we get there in a very even keel, but seldom is that the case. And so just given 2 options, what we depict on this graph, we could look at those heifers and accelerate them there early on and kind of coast them into breeding season, or we could potentially let those heifers rough it and not gain quite as much for the next few months. And once we get them out there to roughly yearling age, we spend 2 or 3 months maybe pushing them a little harder and really accelerating that average daily gain. And relative to some of that excessive condition stuff and just kind of flushing, for lack of a better term, those heifers and bringing them into breeding season at a more rapid rate of growth for a shorter amount of time, there is some research that documents we're going to see a little quicker breed up on those heifers and see them calving a little earlier on in the calving season later down the road. So given the option, coasting them for a while post-weaning, really by the time they're out there at 12 months of age, taking a look at bringing them on in a little better plane of nutrition to that point that they're 14, 15 months of age, probably our more optimum route to go relative to breed up. Weaning to breeding, we talked about looking at those mature cow weights and assessing a target weight for those heifers at the point we're ready to breed them. But the key thing I think here to keep in mind is we do want to manage those replacement heifers separate, give them the level of management, maybe not TLC. We want to treat them like beef cows, but we want to get them there, manage them specifically. I've heard it advocated for that we could just get them weaned, preconditioned, maybe a couple months after that, turn them back out with a mature cow herd. That's going to create some challenges that maybe we don't want, but we want to think about specific management on those heifers relative to bringing them on, setting them up for a lifetime of productivity. Immunization strategies and just thinking about how we go about it. And a lot of this carries over from beef quality network sales in Oklahoma. It is best to get those first round of vaccinations into calves by the time they're 2 to 4 months of age. We would like to get a second round of boosters in them prior to actually weaning, so that we avoid the stress of vaccination and working, as well as that stress of actual weaning those calves at the same time. Some point prior to the age of 10 months, probably about the time that we're given that second round of vaccinations, or potentially something post-weaning, we'd like to get them officially calf vaccinated for brucellosis. The basic list of vaccinations that we want to go through are covered there. Deworming is always helpful, and I suggest always consult with your local veterinarian relative to a vaccination protocol, products, and things you're going to use, so that you have got a good immune system in those heifers as you look at bringing them into production. We think about a typical wheat pasture program, and again, I say typical, tongue in cheek. It should be pretty easy to get those heifers to target weights by the time we're ready to start breeding on them. We might even in some years have to pull back a little bit and manage nutrition so that they don't get excessive in condition. But if we're not in that real good situation, certain times we may want a certain patch of cool season grass that we use to graze out with those replacement heifers, so that we get them at a target weight in roughly a body condition score of 6 by the time we're ready to begin breeding. Won't take a lot of time on this slide, but ionophores, typically growing cattle, or in this case, replacement heifers, are positive. We're going to get some added efficiency as far as growth and gain. So ionophores are a good thing, and used in a efficacious dose are going to help us to get heifers to target weights, probably accelerate our breed up, and they're going to be a positive if we can implement those into a nutritional program. Growth implants, on the other hand, are not recommended if we are looking at replacement heifers. A lot of data exists out there. Something early in life we have seen maybe doesn't have the impact. If we're putting a growth implant in those replacement heifers 2 to 4 months of age, they're going to grow through that, and it's really not going to set them back as far as puberty. But repeatedly implanting, and the general rule of thumb that I would follow here, I would not put growth implants in heifers that I'm going to consider as replacements long term. Culling decisions along the way, and Parker has talked about a lot of this early on as we think about heifers at weaning or as yearling. But as we continue to bring them through, I think that pregnancy checking as soon as possible at the end of breeding season is the best management practice. If we can cull those open heifers earlier on, again, particularly in this cattle market, I have been getting reports from breeders in the past 6 to 8 weeks that we're talking about pregnancy checks, and some folks have said, boy, I was disappointed in how my heifers bred up. We only got 80 to 90% of them bred, right up to the point we took those opens to the sale barn a week or two after we preg checked them, and they were getting returns at over $3,000 a heifer on those opens, and then questioning why they decided to keep back so many. So preg checking early or as soon as possible, eliminating those cull heifers comes with a lot of potential upside, tends to lead to a lifetime of increased productivity, and just really improves our bottom line relative to feed costs and inputs. Body condition score is something that is really an effective tool as we look to bring those heifers along in good shape, not get them excessively conditioned. But that body condition score of 6 is kind of a magic number. I think this is covered in chapter 20 of our beef manual, if producers are interested in looking at examples of body condition scores. But really, from weaning to yearlings and up to the point we breed them, it would be nice to see them at a body condition score 6 along the way. I refer back to that earlier slide. We can let heifers rough it for a few months post-weaning, maybe bring them along at a little accelerated rate of gain, month or two going into calving. But we would like to see them at a body condition score of 6 at that point that we're ready to start breeding. And then it's very important, for the sake of a lifetime of productivity and getting bred back promptly as a 2-year-old, that they are calving in a body condition score of 6. Nutritional reserves in the form of body fat, critically important to breed back. Calving, particularly that first time in heifers, is stressful. They're going to immediately lose a lot of body weight, and having those energy reserves to draw upon are going to be critically important to create that 70 to 80 day window where they actually get to breed back. And some of Dr. Lallman's data we get into on this next slide, and it gets kind of busy, but the key things we want to look at here, the first column, if we look at body condition scores of heifers and then look at how many days it took them to breed back, those numbers in red are the cattle or the heifers that are going to fail to breed back in that 300 or have a calf again in that 365 day window. And so body condition scores are a very effective management tool. And if we've got heifers at a BCS of 6 at the point that they're having that first calf, it really contributes to a more prompt breed back. These numbers in green, as we look at a 5.5, are telling you that those were heifers that are falling into that window and able to accomplish producing a calf in that 365 day window that we really need to stay in order to increase profit potential. So take home message from that: have your heifers at a body condition score of 6, and you are increasing the likelihood of a prompt breed back, and you're setting them up for success long-term to stay in production. Kind of already talked about this slide, but on that previous one, if we look at it, we've actually got some pictures here. You've got an example of one here in the upper right-hand corner at about a BCS of 6. We'd expect her to breed back within 85 days of calving. You look at some really thin heifers here with ribs showing, getting down into some of those critically low body condition scores. They're going to struggle to accomplish that every 12 months. Sorting cows from heifers, we think long-term, if we can manage not only bred heifers, but I think really as we get into those 2-year-olds that are calving for the first time, if we have got a separate lot, trap, pasture, some means of feeding those heifers separately, even if the plane and nutrition is positive for that entire cow herd, we're going to see those 2-year-olds that are subject to bossing by older cows, more mature cows, bigger cows. They may not get their fair share, even if we've got a good quality of nutrition or hay or supplementation out there. And so when it's possible, it is a best management practice to bring those heifers along, particularly those ones raising that first calf, by themselves, manage them accordingly. They're going through a lot of things that they haven't done before. They're still growing themselves. They're nursing a calf for the first time. You've got dentition issues. And in order to set them up and get them to breed back, it is good to manage them separately whenever it's possible. So in summary here, leading us into some questions, we want to properly immunize heifers, starting with something at branding time, 2 to 4 months of age. They're going to need some boosters at weaning or prior to it if possible, probably again at about a year of age. And I would do that again at about a year of age in advance as much as possible of thinking about starting to breed on those heifers at 14 to 15 months of age. Consult with your vet on proper vaccinations. Target that I would suggest is about 65% of their mature weight at a body condition score 6 by 14 to 15 months of age. If at all possible, bring those heifers along using standing forage. Anytime we feed harvested forage, it diminishes profit potential, but manage those heifers accordingly, get them in a plane of nutrition that permits them to be where they need to be at that first breeding season when they should be at their most fertile. A better quality hay or better quality pastures for those young heifers in development as opposed to mature cows is going to work to their advantage. Ionophores are good. Growth implants are bad. That's Mark's take-home message on that point. And then when we get to the point of breeding, if we could start breeding on those heifers, say a month ahead of the mature cow herd, maybe at least one heat cycle ahead of the mature cow herd. Again, just thinking about long-term, setting them up for success. If we can have our bred heifers starting to calve 3 to 4 weeks ahead of the adult cows, it does a lot for us just as far as allocating management and labor. We know we're going to potentially need to be there to provide more assistance, keep an eye a little closer on those replacement heifers that are calving for the first time. We can do that a little easier if they're not doing it in the midst of mature cows. So having them in a separate place, a separate trap, if they can be calving a little bit early, is going to work to the advantage of the heifer as well as to our advantage as far as management. Again, I suggest culling all open heifers as yearlings as promptly as possible. We want to grow heifers adequately. I looped this back into the selection topic that Dr. Henley covered, but if we have a good nutritional program in place, it probably isn't the biggest nor the smallest heifers that have got that optimum growth rate that we really like. So if we're managing them along the way, we should be able to get them to that 65% of their mature weight target, 14 to 15 months of age, if they've got an adequate amount of growth to them. And those heifers that aren't as thrifty and don't get there as well, there's probably an indicator there that they aren't the ones that we want to keep in production. And again, whenever we can and bringing those heifers along, managing heifers separate from mature cows is a good idea. I think that brings us to the end of our slides. I can't say that with certainty because Dr. Henley did have the last chance to call the audible on the slides that we had worked on earlier. But I think in the words of Patrick Mahomes, we're good, no more audibles to call, and we're ready to open up for questions, right?
Thank you very much. I want to mention again to our audience that feel free to have any questions put into the chat or the Q&A section on the screen. Before we get into some of our participant questions, the way I have one myself, where the way this fall has turned out, where we thought we had good wheat pasture prospects when we were at the end of August, and as we're approaching maybe this weekend, we're going to finally get some rain to bring some wheat pasture up. I think a lot of our good early pasture prospects are behind us. That will lend itself to that slower development early on. We usually always get wheat pasture as far as graze out, no matter what the weather conditions are. How much can you hold back these heifers on some mature dry range before we put them onto those graze out wheat pastures before breeding, before we really start impacting performance later on or breeding?
Paul, I think that's a great question. And I know it's one that I've dealt with at my place here in the past couple of weeks. We've had a set of replacement heifers that everything seemed to be going really well. It was a set of heifers that we looked at probably starting to breed about January or February. But just taking a look at body condition score on them, it looks to me like some of them have slipped down to probably in the 4s. And so I am going to begin to supplement them with some protein a little bit, follow an Oklahoma Gold program, and get them to some mature native grass. And I would expect to probably accelerate their growth. And I'm not weighing them or anything like that, but I tend to look at that more just from body condition score standpoint. I feel like if I can bring them back to a 6, somewhere in that ballpark here over the next 2 to 3 months, we're probably on target.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that. So, obviously weight and body condition score is a huge thing, but I don't think there's just one specific answer to that, because I think you'd have to know the age of those heifers too. I mean, I think those two things cross paths, and oftentimes we really just think about their weight and body condition score. But if we are kind of roughing them for a while, that's fine as long as we're not going to breed them till they're 15 months of age to calve at 2 years, age. But if you're, taking heifers out of your standard production cycle and then you are going to try to move them up 1 month, that means that we are breeding 14-month-old heifers instead of 15-month-old heifers. And so I think that growth rate needs to happen faster. And if you let those younger heifers not have a cycle as long, I think there's a lot of variables there, I guess I'll follow up on. And so I think you can rough them a little longer and let them get a little further down the line if you're going to breed them at 15 or even older. But if you're going to push them and try to move them ahead of your cow herd, or even having heifers that were born in the middle or late portion of your calving season, I wouldn't let them get too far gone.
Thank you.
And then there's a couple questions in here. A great question: during the selection process, how much added muscle through the rear round can we sort for without experiencing calving troubles? Asking simply, as I've heard a lot of talks of promoting red meat yield. That's a great question. I think historically speaking, our breeds of cattle that have more muscle in red meat yield and cutout value are harder calving. And, I think no doubt about that. But I would say with some of the selection, I guess, traits and things out there, I think we can kind of go against that kind of ideology, I suppose, and maybe that's a little bit through, gestation length through selection for calving ease. And I think more than, muscle shape of the animal, I think things like bone and their skeletal size probably more than muscle affects calving ease. So just my thoughts to that. Mark, here's a question for you. What are your thoughts on leaving heifers on the cow longer, say 9 to 10 months? Is there enough benefit to the heifer versus potential hardship to the cow?
I always advocate for weaning earlier. I can elaborate, but I just see more upside to overall production for the sake of, because we got a mature cow herd to think about too, and we want them, at a perfect world, they'd be at a 5.5 to 6 body condition score at the time they calve. I think we can more efficiently grow those heifers by weaning earlier as opposed to leaving them on. So I think there's upside from both sides of it.
Then the next question here, Mark, is to you, asked about, or you talked about preg checking early and having that short breeding season. So the question was, how long do you recommend running the bull with heifers? What should be that length when we pull them?
That is going to depend on individual operations, but a defined calving season is a critically important part of good management in cow-calf operations. And so the shorter we can make our breeding seasons is going to lead to more uniform calf crops when we wean them. More uniform calf crops are going to have more value when we market all those calves. In a perfect world, we'd calve them all in 3 weeks. That realistically probably isn't possible. 45-day calving seasons would be wonderful, but realistically probably 60 or 90 is what's going to fall in and be most practical for most commercial cow-calf operations. But keep it defined, and the shorter is better. When it comes specifically to replacement heifers, and I say hold them accountable for getting bred promptly, if we've kept back enough heifers and we're keeping 10 to 50% more than we think we need, I don't have any problem with heifers that don't manage to get bred, say in a couple heat cycles. I don't know why we'd want to keep them around long term. So if we do some kind of synchronization, do some kind of an AI, maybe turn a bull out behind them, give them one more heat cycle. I don't think there's anything holding heifers accountable to get bred that promptly. If we're not doing any synchronization and we're just turning out bulls for natural service, realistically a 45-day breeding season on heifers, I believe is a standard that we should stick with or at least consider.
Yeah, we got one more question here from Brian. It says, how can future synchronization product protocols help maintain a replacement first calving heifer to stay in the herd, even in natural service, to maintain that 365-day calving season?
Parker, you want to take that one? I'm not sure I got all the question, but
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
guess I need a little clarification on that. So Brian, are you stating that do we by using synchronization protocols to help them start cycling and have an estrus protocol or having an estrus cycle prior to the breeding season? Is that what you're asking? So I think that's what he pumped or sent in.
Parker, he answered your question in the chat. Cedar to help.
Yeah.
With
So one thing we didn't mention, there's there's the long-term estrus synchronization protocol where you put a cedar in for 14 days using the progesterone to hopefully kind of kickstart any heifers that are anestrus and bring them in to have that first heat cycle. So that way you're not breeding them. You're breeding them maybe on their second estrus cycle if you have any of them that are anestrus at the time. So that, I think that's what you're going for. On those heifers, you might consider a synchronization protocol because a cedar that can help you kickstart the estrus cycle if they're not. And then the next question, when it comes to preg testing, what's the most accurate and efficient method? Traditional, shoot side, or is another method preferred? Well, Mark, you can talk to this, but I think the most accurate method is going to be having a trained professional there that sticks an arm in them, either arm or ultrasound, and you're going to know the answer. Obviously, aligning schedules with somebody, if you're not trained in that area, might be challenging. And so there are, blood tests, blood cards, things like that, that if you're not able to schedule those things, and it might be kind of shot from the hip of when you're able to work or run your heifers through a chute, those are the better, option with considering those the situations. But if you can find a trained professional, a veterinarian, to come in and go through them, that's going to be the most accurate, quickest, best method.
And I would add this, and we've all probably got things that we're most comfortable with, but just to build upon what Dr. Henley said, I think when you can have an ultrasound technician that not only confirms that there is a fetus growing, but can potentially look at a beating heart in that fetus. And it gets interesting, and don't ask me exactly what that day of development is through gestation right now, but I know there's a point when you use ultrasound, you can confirm a pregnancy. Sometimes you can see a growing fetus, but you can't confirm that there's actually a beating heart in it. So probably the greatest level of reassurance when it comes to those preg check tools would be to use ultrasound.
Well, we have one question in the chat concerning the nutritional timing. Do you suggest pushing heifers early for frame development and then slowing down closer to breeding for condition, or the opposite? If I push late before breeding, how long after breeding before slowing down the feeding?
I would coast them, thinking from starting at weaning point. I would coast early. If I'm gonna start breeding them at 14 to 15 months of age, then the time they're roughly 12 months is when I would worry about pushing them a little harder to grow them, and probably continuing that through breeding season. Then you probably reach point again, realistically, once they're bred, they could coast a little bit, and then managing to make sure you're at a BCS 6 as they go into calving without getting overly aggressive at feeding them really, really hard late gestation.
We had a good seminar on that just last week, by the way. Bailey Thompson presented some nice data on that. And I think, yeah, it probably depends on where they're at in the middle of that period between weaning and breeding. As Dr. Johnson suggested earlier, you know, if you're way behind, it's probably time to get started. If you're kind of ahead, then, you know, maybe you could delay that sort of flushing period, if you want to think of it like that. But the thing I was going to mention, Dr. Johnson, is that in her data, really, as long as you wound up at the goal, the target weight that you all had mentioned earlier in this webinar today, boy, the reproductive data and all the experiments she presented were not a lot different. They were pretty much all successful as long as you met those target weight goals by the beginning of the breeding season. And then as I recall, I don't remember exactly, but then from that point forward, those studies used, you know, just a maybe a slightly positive nutritional balance to, you know, gaining a little weight, but not pushing them hard as maybe the question kind of suggests there. But very good reproductive performance as long as those target weight goals were met, regardless of whether the push came early or late.
Well, I see no further questions. Thank you for an excellent session. Really good kickoff for our Ranchers Thursday Lunchtime series. Next week, we will have Dr. Jonathan Kamek from our entomology department, our extension livestock entomologist, give us an update on screwworms and the Asian longhorn tick, followed by we'll see what the wheat pasture turns out to be, what this topic will turn out to be on November 6th. Brian Pugh and myself will talk about some stocking strategies on wheat pasture. The 13th, we'll have an excellent session with Dr. Darrell Peel on livestock markets in an expanding cow herd. And then we will close this out on November 20th with Dr. David Lawman giving us some updates on where to look for some economical supplementation for this winter. With that, we will go ahead and end our session today. Thank you again, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Henley. Very good topic, and I think everybody got a lot out of this one today.
Thanks for having us. Enjoyed it.